Hi, and welcome back. This is Botany 101, and I'm Angela Nishimoto, your guide for today's tour. All right, here we are. We're in the front of Foster Botanical Gardens. Foster Botanical Gardens is located in downtown Honolulu, all right, and is one of 5 gardens in the sort of like the constellation of the Honolulu Botanical Gardens. It is the major garden in that particular configuration. Now here we are. We're standing underneath this sort of like a shrub tree. Okay, so you might think, what is the difference between a shrub and a tree? Because both do indeed have woody growth. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about herbaceous plants. You know, the grasses, the turf grasses and the forage grasses and such, and then you can actually look at them and you see that the growth that they have is relatively soft and succulent. Yes, and this growth is actually termed herbaceous growth. So these are called herbs, okay, or herbs, all right? Secondly, you have plants that have secondary growth, all right? And this is generally from, remember, the lateral meristems, which account for growth in girth. So this here, okay, is a plant that is showing secondary growth. And this plant here has bark, okay? Bark, of course, is the exterior part of a woody plant, right? And it comes from a secondary meristem, which is called the court cambium. And of course, the vascular tissue, which is inside the stem, comes from the secondary meristem known as the vascular cambium, right? Anyway, see, so here we have, okay, a plant that could be either a shrub or a tree, all right? And how can you tell? It's because of the woody growth. And generally, true woody growth only comes from dicots. Now, this here plant is showing that it has a branching, you know, secondary branching from relatively low, okay, in the plant itself, which comes to about 20 feet tall, all right? And this plant here, right, so you can call it a shrub because shrubs can be defined as plants that have their branching, their main branching coming off the main trunk from less than halfway up the trunk. And then thirdly, you have trees. Trees generally have their main branching coming up off of the trunk about halfway or above, you know, the overall height of the tree. Okay, so we have herbs, which are herbaceous, we have shrubs, and we have trees, which are both woody kind of plants. So this is, you might be amazed to hear, it is mock orange, okay, what we in Hawaii call mock orange. You will recall, okay, or in the future we're going to talk about this, about the fact that you can have many different plants with the same common name. But this plant has only one scientific name, which is called Murea paniculata, all right? Now here, we have here, you know, here a leaflet, okay, so leaflets of a leaf. So this is an entire leaf of this plant. Okay, mock orange. And how can you tell that this is a compound leaf, a pinnately compound leaf? Well, if you take a look at these sections here, at the bases of them, you don't have any buds, okay, no axillary buds. Remember, because you have the stem, 2 parts of the stem are the nodes and the internodes, and this is actually part of the midrib of this leaf, yeah? So what you have is these are leaflets making up the whole blade. As you will recall, you have the blade, all right, and the petiole making up a leaf, right? So here you have the leaflets comprising the blade, and here you have the petiole, okay, of the plant. So this here has pinnately compound leaves. You might not have noticed that before, okay? This plant is also in the citrus family with the Rutaceae, yeah? Has these little fruits, and I bet if we were to actually get a ripe one and dissect it, it would have like a typical Hesperidium type of fruit. Right, with the fruit divided into segments, yeah, just like oranges, just like lemons, like grapefruit and pomelo, all the different citrus fruits. And can you remember what kind of fruit this is called? It's called a Hesperidium, all right? Anyway, so Hesperidium fruits are also known as citrus fruits, okay? Anyway, I guess that wraps up what we want to talk about here. And if you come with me, we're going to move along and continue on the tour, all right? Okay, let's see. Here we are under the spreading false kamani tree. Okay, what you just saw. It has those beautiful, large, paddle-shaped leaves. Yes, and it is actually an example of a plant that didn't get here to Hawaii on its own. It is not native to Hawaii. Yeah, remember that you have native plants and you also have introduced plants that were deliberately or inadvertently introduced by people. Okay, and then the native plants, you know, they tend to be either endemic or they are indigenous, two different kinds of native plants. You also have two different kinds of introduced plants. You have those that were introduced by the original inhabitants, the first people of Hawaii, and those are Polynesian introductions. Secondly, you also have recent introductions, plants introduced into Hawaii, after 1778, and this is one of them, one of the recent introductions. And one of the reasons why I wanted to show you this plant is because it is an example of what we call the disharmonic flora of Hawaii. What is a disharmonic flora? A disharmonic flora means that there are very large groups, whole groups of plants that are missing from the flora of the islands, and this is one of them. This tropical almond, also known as a false kamani, Terminalia catapa, is actually a plant that is native to many Pacific islands, but it never got to Hawaii. You can see it's a beautiful tree. You can see it at beach areas, especially low, low elevation near the ocean. And another thing about it, they call it tropical almond because if you look at the fruit, there's this fruit here. This fruit, all right, is actually looking a little like a very large almond. And you can actually, you can roast it, you can crack it, and you can eat the seed inside of it, yeah? Tropical almond, Terminalia catapa, an excellent example of the disharmony, okay, of Hawaii's flora. There are other plants that also show that same thing, okay? So we'll probably see some of them in a little while, right? Okay, so we're gonna head on over in this direction, okay? All right, so here we are. Let's see. What we have here is kind of a tropical monocot. Okay, this is probably a philodendron. The reason why I want to talk about this is that because we're going to actually see a lot of tropical monocots here today, right? And as we progress up this walkway here, we have pothos, which epipremnum, which is probably everybody has seen. It is used very widespread in Hawaii for a landscape plant, and it's because it's of course from a tropical area, and of course in the subtropics of Hawaii it does excellently in the landscape. You can see it makes an excellent ground cover. The philodendrons, really nice, contrasting with that too. And we have even here a bamboo, right? A bamboo, which is usually Asian Pacific Island kind of introduction. And then here we have what some people know of as an umbrella tree. It's also known as the octopus tree, and some people call it a rubber tree, okay, pretty much. And people also say it as Schefflera, okay, Schefflera actinophila. You can see it makes a beautiful tree. It's really attractive, but at the same time, it's actually kind of like a weedy plant. So for many people who are in conservation in Hawaii, that's like a bad guy. Okay, well, the reason for that is that it actually evolved someplace, where it had whatever preyed on it, whatever fungus would attack it, and etc. But once in Hawaii, it just goes wild. It does have these beautiful fruit, flowers and fruits that it makes. People can use them in lei, like vili lei, haku lei. But then what the birds will do, the birds will spread it all over through the forest. And another thing about it too is that it can end up strangling a plant that it might have germinated on and grow. So it's very destructive. It also tends to sort of ease out, kind of move against native plants, which is not such a good thing. Okay, so now we're approaching the entrance to the garden itself. Okay, and we're going to see more stuff. Okay, so come along, right? So here we are, at the entrance to Foster Botanical Garden. Okay, what we have here, I wanted you folks to see, is take a look at that structure there. What do you think it is? This large brown curiously shaped structure. Well, think about it. It's actually a seed, okay? It's not a fruit, it's a seed. It's a seed of the plant that has the largest seed in the world. Now that seed is actually from a plant called coco de mer. Why do they call them coco de mer? Because I guess coco, some people believe that means a fruit or something. But there are sailors who told the story about how there was a tree under the water, that actually made fruit, and then they'd see these seeds floating around in the ocean, in the Indian Ocean. They made up a story that there was land underneath the ocean surface that gave rise to this. So mer, M-E-R, it means sea or ocean in French, yeah? So this was like a fruit of the ocean, or so they said. And it is the largest seed of any plant that's known in the world. Okay, superlative, all right? Here we are, all right? We're going to take a look at something very interesting. You see this here? This is fruits. All these little red things are fruits of an anthurium. This is probably an anthurium species. And it's interesting because you notice that this part doesn't have any fruits, okay? So if we come up here to the flowers, all right, this is actually a typical aroid type of flower. What do you think of when you look at this? Anthuriums, Spathiphyllum, also known as peace lily, Calo. These are all in the family Araceae, or they're known as aroids. All of them have this type of structure. Jack in the pulpit is another one. Here, this is an inflorescence with very reduced flowers, okay? And this is something called a spathe. All right, it's a bract, like a leaf, subtending this inflorescence. And generally, you'll have a lot of male flowers with greatly reduced parts. These would be called imperfect, incomplete flowers because they don't have all four parts of the flower. Male flowers tend to be near the top, female flowers to the bottom. Now think about it. One of the things that plants usually try to do is they try to prevent inbreeding, yeah? One way that they sort of work around the situation when you have female flowers and male flowers on the same plant, yeah, they're not bisexual, they only have unisexual flowers. What happens usually is that the females and the males mature at different times. That prevents the plant from pollinating itself and too much inbreeding, okay, which can be sort of a problem sometimes. All right. Anyway, so female flowers toward the bottom, male flowers toward the top. They usually mature at different times. So what you'll get is some hybridization, okay? Now the next thing, all right, we're going to look at here. All right, so we have something called Moses in the bulrushes, also known as the oyster plant. Okay, so we can actually see they're it's a little boat-shaped sort of structure in this way. All right, so Moses in the bulrushes, you know the story about Pharaoh's daughter, right? That first of all, Moses was born, and his mother and sister were afraid that he was going to be killed. Yeah, because I guess Pharaoh made a command that all the male children should be killed. And what happened was that his mother managed to save him by putting him in a little boat. So if you look at this plant, it looks like maybe a little something in a boat. Another name for this plant is oyster plant. Okay. Now oyster plant is just like that. You have like a little shell-looking structure with a little white flowers in there that look like, you know, like pearls in an oyster. Also known as Rio Spathacea. This is another really good landscaping plant. Okay, very good in the landscape. It can tolerate shade. It can also tolerate quite a bit of sun. And in fact, when I worked in landscaping, we had to tear out a whole bed of them and replant it because it grew so fast and so furiously. All right. Now, as we take a look at this big tree up here, you see more philodendrons, more aroids, all right? Now this plant here, okay, is a plant growing on another plant. It looks like it's growing on some kind of tabebuya, which is of course a tree, and this vine growing up there is something that we call an epiphyte, of course. Epiphytes are plants that grow upon other plants without getting direct sustenance or without causing the other plants harm, because epiphytes are not parasitic. They don't actually suck up any sugar from these plants. Okay, one more thing we want to look at in this little segment over here. We have here something which is known as ekaha. Okay, ekaha of course is a Hawaiian word, right? And it is actually native to Hawaii, and this is what we call a bird's nest fern, ekaha. Yeah. So one of the characteristics that we see about this fern is that on some of the leaves, they're reproductive leaves, and they have these structures underneath, and these are called sori, S-O-R-I. Okay, and these contain structures that have spores, because ferns are plants that disperse and do sexual reproduction through spores. Okay, not seeds. All right. So even a big fern like this, okay, can actually reproduce itself from really small propagules, such as the spores. Spores are sometimes only 1 to just a very few cells large. They're very tiny. They're like dust. Okay, and this is how probably a lot of the native ferns got to Hawaii, probably brought here by the jet stream or by some other wind factor, bringing them into Hawaii. All right. Now another characteristic of ferns that is generally something that is a characteristic that you can distinguish them from other kinds of plants is that as the leaves are unfurling, they will actually form structures known as fiddleheads. Let's see, get this here. You see this structure here? like this, it's kind of curling. Even a fern such as this one will have fiddleheads as the fern is unfurling or opening its leaves, okay? So two characteristics of fern. You have sori, you have fiddleheads. And ferns can span the whole gamut of all kinds of shapes and sizes. You have maidenhair ferns, you have ferns that look like four-leaf clovers, you know, the Marsilia villosa, and etc. Okay? Anyway, so we'll continue, all right? Okay, now here we are, all right, once again, together. One of the things I wanted to show you is that palms are sometimes difficult, you know, to kind of distinguish. But one characteristic that can help you with it is that sometimes you have palms that have more than one stem for a particular tree, and they call them clumping palms. And then you also have other palms that have a single trunk only. They only have a single trunk, and those are called solitary palms. All right, here we are on the grass. What you see before you on the side of me, okay, that long gray trunk with that kind of central swelling in the center, that is what we call a Cuban royal palm, also known as a Caribbean royal palm, all right? You kind of move your eye up that long gray trunk, okay, and what you see is you'll see leaves, right? Each of those long structures is actually a leaf with a lot of leaflets coming off of it. So the Cuban royal palm is something that we can call a feather palm, okay? With remember pinnate, it has pinnately compound leaves, and pinna means feather. Yeah, that's why they call that a feather palm. Right next to it, over here on the side is more what we call a fan palm. It's a little bit different looking. So this also is a way you can kind of classify palms. You have feather palms, you have fan palms, and if you look up the trunk of the tree next to it, right, you actually see leaves that look like leaves that people might have fanned other people with, like in the olden days, you know, in the Greek and Roman and Egyptian days, right? So you have feather palms, you have fan palms. So that's another characteristic that you can do in order to classify palms. Yeah, palms are a difficult group though. In Hawaii, we're very lucky. We have a specialist in palms. Okay, he works at the Lion Arboretum. He's like a world-class expert on palms. And of course, palms are generally more from the tropics and the subtropics. They have that nice rosette habit of the leaves. Now, another thing about these palms is that in Hawaii, they're very valuable. Okay, if you have a palm growing in your yard or in your garden, that's an excellent thing to have. Both because, for one thing, the roots tend to be rather shallow in the soil. For another thing, they get to grow pretty large. Well, not that fast. It might take 10, 20, 30 more years for a palm to grow to its full size. A coconut palm will take about 100 years. It can actually live up to 100 years old and can bear many, many fruits. Now, the thing about palms also very valuable in terms of money. Okay, if you happen to have space in your yard to grow a palm, you thought, oh, it looks nice, we can kind of let it grow, and you can actually be growing money in your yard, because one of these palms could probably sell for upwards of $10,000, $12,000, $15,000. And if you did contact a landscape company, if you decided, oh, you know, I don't really want the coconut tree in my yard anymore, they'll come, they'll dig it out for you, and they'll pay you a lot of money. They'll take it away and plant it, because they're very valuable in terms of shopping centers, in terms of resort areas, because think about it, when you have a new shopping center, you have a new resort area, they right away, they want to put mature plants in there. They don't want to wait 10 years before all the plants grow in. Okay, so it's a good way you can make money. If you want to, you have a new yard, plant a palm in your yard. It's beautiful. It's also an investment for the future, all right? Hi. This little tree, or big tree as the case may be, that I've come out with is what we call Chinese banyan. Okay, it's also known as Ficus microcarpa. And when you take a look at it, it's kind of an interesting tree. It has these long branches that kind of stick out. So what does it do? In an adaptation to that, it will actually send out adventitious roots. Do you remember adventitious roots? Adventitious roots are roots that grow from places other than where you expect the root to grow. So here are these roots coming down, growing from the main trunk up there, right? So these adventitious roots will then work their way down onto the soil, into the soil, and then they'll pull up to make them taut. So they're called contractile roots, okay? They kind of contract after they get into the soil. Now, why would a plant want to do that? Well, for one thing, you know, in the tropical forest, the plant is actually competing for light, okay, rather than competing for water or any other nutrients and such like that. So therefore, the taller the plant can get, the wider it can spread its canopy, the more sunlight it'll get, right? Photosynthesis, getting sunlight, and what it does, makes more plant. Okay, it makes more plant, gets bigger, puts out more leaves, does more photosynthesis, sends down roots. The roots are actually going to turn into stem eventually. What does that do? They will actually support the branches as they move out this way, because if you have a big heavy branch with epiphytes on it sometimes, well, you need something to brace it. So what happens is that the stem, of course, has secondary growth, getting larger and larger, and you actually have the roots, okay, the roots which will then make more stem, all right? So this is Ficus microcarpa, Chinese banyan. So some people consider this to be a real weed as well, you know. Now here we have an epiphyte, okay, an epiphyte, and this of course is a fern, all right. You can tell that if you take one of these leaves, turn it over, here you see a sorus or sori, the spore-bearing part, okay, of the leaf of this particular fern. This is a volunteer, which means it is probably naturally here. Probably a spore born on the wind, kind of hit this plant and it germinated, and now you have a nice full-size fern. This is a beautiful ornamental sort of plant if you are interested in ferns, right? And here you have a very nice volunteer, right? Epiphyte, right? Grows on one plant, okay, without doing the other plant any harm. Now over beyond the Chinese banyan, beyond the Ficus microcarpa, here you have something known as the bow tree. It's in the same genus as the Chinese banyan. It's actually called Ficus religiosa. And it is called Ficus religiosa because, okay, this plant is sacred to the Buddhists. Why are they sacred to the Buddhists? Okay, because for one thing, a Buddha who had wandered as a mendicant monk, you know, after he saw the four sights, was it the three sights or the four sights? And he renounced his princely origins and he decided to wander as a mendicant monk, okay? So he wandered and he's trying to figure out what is the cause of suffering? Why do we actually suffer in our lives, you know? So what he did is that he finally decided that wandering, being poor, suffering, you know, doing mortifications of the flesh, which some penitents still do, yeah, he fasted until his belly, but his navel actually touched the back of his spine. That's part of the story. Okay, so he decided this isn't going to do it. So what did he do? He actually sat down under a bow tree and he declared he would not move, he would not stir from the spot until he had come to the root of why is there suffering in life. Right? And actually, you know, demons tempted him, all kinds of things went on around him, but he just didn't respond. He just decided to, he just sat, okay, until the answer came to him. So the answer, of course, is desire, or what we call today craving. That people, you know, suffer because there's something they want, you know, that maybe they can't get. So they suffer, okay, from desire. All right. Anyway, getting back to the tree itself, he did attain his enlightenment under a tree. Now this one here too is actually a special tree because the tree that Buddha attained his enlightenment under, a little sliver of that or a cutting was taken to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka in some old books is called Ceylon. It's an island off the southern tip of India, right? So a piece of that was grown into a tree, and a piece of that tree was brought to Hawaii, and that's what they say this tree is from. It's actually from a tree that's from a tree, the original tree that Buddha sat under and attained his enlightenment, okay? So it is also known as a special tree. It is protected by Honolulu City Ordinance. You will see some of these trees here at Foster Garden. You'll also see them around in Honolulu. They're actually denoted exceptional trees, and it is actually against the law to tamper with them or to hurt them in any way. Now another feature of this tree, you can see that it's nice and big as well. It has these big branches going out, and it also has these leaves with what we call drip tips, right? The very tip of the leaf is pointed, all right? What is that function? Well, because this tree, like the Ficus microcarpa, originated in the rainforest, okay? A lot of rain hitting the tree on the leaves, it doesn't do the tree any good. Okay, what the tree needs the water at is at the root. And these leaves will actually funnel the water, okay, to the tip of the leaf. It'll drip into the ground, and there the plant can take up the water from the root. All right? Okay, so it's two very special trees. Right? Very, very important. Okay, here we come, here we come. All right. So what are these? These are actually crotons. You folks might have recognize them. You know, you have lots of different kind of varieties. Right? You have here some with red in their leaves, others with veins in their leaves that look a little bit different. They come in all kinds of shapes, all kinds of sizes, you know. They're known as Codium variegatum. And another thing too about these plants is that they're very variable even though they're the same species, and also they also never got to Hawaii even though they are native to other Pacific islands as well. Okay? Now when we come in here, we're going to see something pretty special, all right? For one thing, here we go. You have these flowers, right, of the plant, and these are unisexual flowers. Unisexual flowers. That means that they only have female part. They don't have any male. And when you look at them, they sort of vase-shaped, and the three things that come up together like that, those are the stigmas. Remember, stigma, style, and ovary. The little bulb at the bottom is the ovary, which has the ovules, which has the egg inside of it. Okay, female flowers. Okay, on croton, right? Another thing about this plant also here's another one with female flowers. We also have male flowers. So you have female flowers only, or they're female only with pistils, and then you have male flowers here, like this, which have stamens. The female flowers only are called pistillate flowers because they're only made up of a pistil. The male flowers are called staminate flowers because they are only made of stamens. All right. So an interesting thing too is that this male inflorescence, the female inflorescence are on the same plant, and that's a particular phenomenon known as monecy. Remember monecy, M-O-N-O-E-C-Y. That means one house. So you have male flowers, female flowers in the same plant, in the same house. Okay. Now, when you somehow get pollination, when somehow pollen from the male, okay, gets onto the female, eventually you'll have the development of something known as a fruit, right? Sexual reproduction, okay? So you have a fruit from the female after pollination by the male. So this plant here is a monoecious plant, male flowers, female flowers on the same plant, male and female in the same house, okay? Other examples of this, we also have breadfruit or ulu, also has male and female flowers on the same plant, and there are others, okay? Anyway, good example, unisexual flowers. Here we are, okay, here we have a magnificent plant known as spider lily. If you actually take a look at the leaves, you will see that the secondary veins are running parallel to each other, also parallel to the midrib. That's one clue, okay, what this plant is in terms of the question I'm going to ask. If you look at a flower, an isolated flower, you will see that it has, let's see, 1, 2, 3 sepals. Remember sepals? They help protect the rest of the flower when it's in bud. They're the exterior part of the flower bud. And then you'll also have 1, 2, 3 petals. In this case, in the spider lily, you have the sepals and the petals very similar to each other. They're the same color, they're white, yeah, as well as the fact that they're about the same size. In such cases, oftentimes botanists call the flower segments, the petals and the sepals together, refer to them as tepals, T-E-P-A-L-S. Another thing, white, light-colored flower, especially fragrant, and it does have a little bit of a soapy kind of fragrance to it, kind of sweet, and has a fragrance which is stronger at night. Moth-pollinated flower, because we must always remember that the flowers for the plant is their sex organ. This is how they do sexual reproduction. Anyway, talking about sex organs, we're taking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stamens. Remember, the stamens are made up of the anther, this long, skinny, yellowish part here. The anther produces the pollen. Then you have this magenta-colored structure here known as a filament. Okay, so the anther is comprised of, okay, the anther and the filament. Okay. Then in the center here, this little shrinking violet thing in the center here. And in this case also, probably the male parts and the female parts are ready to go, you know, at different times. So that probably prevents self-pollination for these flowers. So this little thing here, this little doohickey here, is actually the stigma, which receives the pollen, the style, the tube that goes all the way down into the flower, okay, until it hits the ovary. And the ovary, of course, is where you have one or more ovules. And in this flower, you can see the ovary is what they call superior. That means it is actually above the attachment part, because you might think, well, you know, the sepals and the petals are all the way up here, but they're actually tubular. Okay, they're what they call connate, where you have the sepals fuse up to a certain point and you have the petals fused up to a certain point. So I do believe that these guys have superior ovaries, okay, the ones that you can see pretty well. Okay, so what is this? Dicot or monocot? Okay, think about it, all right? All right, here we are. And what do you see before you here on the ground? You see orchids, right? Now orchids, you know, there may be 25,000 different species of orchids, right? 25,000 species. And there are probably tens and tens of thousands of hybrid orchids as well, all right? So one way you could kind of classify orchids, if you were to talk about their physical properties, is you could talk about terrestrial orchids, orchids like these, spathoglottises, that put their roots into the soil, okay? That's one type. And then why don't we take a look at one of these flowers, all right? I'll just pick one right here. Right? Now the orchid, okay? You can tell by the leaves that you have parallel leaf venation, right? Another thing too, so parallel leaf venation generally comes with being a monocot, right? A monocot. Now if you were to look at the flower itself, you might think, oh, you know, that doesn't look like a monocot flower. Look at that, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these things here. But if you take a look at it, you do actually have 1, 2, 3 sepals, and you'll have 1, 2, 3 petals. This is one of the characteristics of orchids, is that one of the petals is differentiated. It's different from the other petals and is differentiated into something that people call a lip or a labellum, okay? Now the interesting about orchids, okay, this is another quality that orchids have that almost no other flower has, is that this little structure that's opposite to the lip or labellum, this is called the column, okay? The column is a fused sexual structure because almost all orchids are bisexual or perfect. Perfect flowers are what they call bisexual flowers. And if you were actually to dissect the orchid, you take off this little anther cap, okay? You'll have these two little things, can you see it? These two little things that are yellow, those are like packets of pollen known as pollinia, okay? Usually a lot of the spathoglottises we have in Hawaii, they will actually self-fertilize where the anther cap will drop off or fall over, and then the pollen would actually go onto its own stigma. There's a sticky area right underneath where the anther was, and that, I lost a lip, that is actually the stigmatic surface. It's sticky, it actually clings to the pollen, so you have a fused sexual structure known as a column. That is another characteristic of orchids and makes them very special. Okay? They could be the largest largest family of flowering plants. Well anyway, after pollination happens, what happens? Okay? Well, pollination, then you have fertilization, and you also have the petals, the sepals, the stamen, you know, the anther cap all shriveling up, and eventually the flower might actually lose it. But here, this white spathoglottis here, you have a fruit, okay? Here you have a green fruit, lots of ants running around on here. But then when the fruit is ready to open up, it's actually a dry fruit known as a capsule. All right. When the fruit is ready to spread its seed, and some orchid capsules can actually have up to 1 million seeds. Can you believe it? 1 million seeds. I can't even count that high. Anyway, so here you have the fact that the fruit is a dry fruit when it's ready. It opens up and dehisces or splits open at either 3 or 6 different places because it has a 3-parted ovary. Yeah. So this is how the plant does sex. Okay. Usually in the orchids, you have a specific pollinator that will specifically pollinate only one species of orchid. So there you actually have pretty closely related orchids that cannot breed together because the pollinators are different. So we have terrestrial orchids down here, need to have their roots in the soil, and then we also have epiphytic orchids that tend to grow on trees. Okay, so here's one. And I believe that the people here at Foster Garden did put it up on this palm tree, but here it is. Here's a dendrobium. A lot of people might not recognize it as a dendrobium, but it does indeed have traits of the dendrobium flowers, okay? One of which you have a little chin, also known as a mentum, okay, under there. It's very beautiful. It's actually probably a hybrid in a section of dendrobium known as Laturia section, okay? Anyway, so we have terrestrial orchids, we have epiphytic orchids. So that's one way you can divide orchids, okay, from their habit, where they live, all right? Now here we are once again, okay, and we're to look at this plant, would say pretty much, and you would be right, it's an orchid, all right? One of the things I want you to notice is that these orchids are actually growing upwards this way, just this way, right? These are what we call a monopodial orchid. What does monopodial mean? Mono means one, podio refers to foot. So this is a single-footed orchid, which means it only grows in an upward direction. Other orchids, such as cattleyas, dendrobiums, paphiopedilums, such like that, they're what they call sympodial orchids. And sym means together, podio means feet. So it's feet together. So how do these guys grow? They'll actually grow this way along a rhizome. Remember, a rhizome is a horizontal stem. So you have the rhizome growing this way, and it'll send up what they call pseudobulbs. It's not really stems necessarily, but they're like leaf sheaths, leaf bases going up this way, then going up that way. So you have monopodial orchids and you have sympodial orchids. So this is another of the great divides that you can divide orchids into. Another thing I want to call your attention to is look at these beautiful roots. Yeah, these beautiful roots with these kind of spongy white coating on it, which is called velamen, V-E-L-A-M-E-N. This is supposed to help the orchid absorb water, because many orchids do indeed live in the trees, or they're epiphytes. And another thing about them too is that they're in places where they're exposed to the air, and they rely on being able to soak up a whole bunch of water all at one time. Another thing you'll notice about this root, you see this green tip here? A lot of these epiphytic orchids, they will have photosynthetic roots. They've actually done studies where they had certain plants in a pot, the roots in the pot. They had others that we had the orchid in the pot, but some of it crawling out with the roots out of the pot. They found out the ones with the roots out of the pot actually threw bigger flowers or more flowers. Okay, so this actually helped the plant do more photosynthesis, make bigger flowers or more flowers, and help that way. Now, if you were to take a look at this, you can see that this orchid is not exactly the same as the other one that we looked at, but if you look at it, it is variations on a theme. Okay, you have the sepals, the dorsal sepals, the two lateral sepals. Here you have the two petals here, plus the third petal, which differentiated, is a lip, and opposite the lip is the column. All right. Anyway, so a typical orchid, and these are vandaceous orchids, Vanda type, Vanda hybrid, clearly monopodial orchids. Okay. Now, as we take a look around here, okay, we can see that there are other tropical monocots right here in sight. These are bromeliads. You might know, you might have recognized them, that they are actually relatives of pineapple. Okay, they're in the Bromeliaceae, other tropical monocots. And one of the things, what do you see here? What do you see? You can see that some are green, okay, and some of them are all green, even if they're the same type of plant. Some of them have red around them. Remember that generally when you have color, when you have scent, it's for a purpose. In nature, it's for a purpose, okay? And for these ones here, the purpose, the reason why some of their leaves have red in it is that the leaf, that part that is red, is saying, hey, here are the flowers. Because if you were to look into the vase of the bromeliad, you would see flowers, all right? Now, the bromeliad also has a kind of habit which is called a rosette habit. A rosette habit is when you have leaves, growing this way in a spiral. The leaves are very close together. So you might have difficulty finding out where the stem actually is. All right? Anyway, so we have bromeliads, we have orchids, okay? We've already looked at palms, okay? And we're going to continue, all right? And here we have another bromeliad. One of the things you'll notice, just like the other ones we just looked at, you see color, right? Red. Generally, red is a real flag to birds, especially, also to butterflies, right? Nice, bright colors. And the plant never expends any energy to make color or to make smell or anything like that unless it's for a purpose, yeah? And the purpose of these colorings here is actually probably to attract a pollinator. And when you look at it, what do you see? You see red. The part that is red is actually the part of the plant which are bracts. Bracts actually are modified leaves. And like the pink or the red that you saw in the other vase bromeliad, here, clearly, the reason for this red coloration is to attract some kind of animal to transfer pollen from one flower to another, okay, and affect pollination. Pollination then leads to fertilization in many cases, and then what you have is the perpetuation of the species, right? Hello, and here we are. All right, here we have a plant that we call moa, right? Moa, of course, means chicken in Hawaiian, yep. Not exactly sure why people call it moa, but It could be that generally you have this way that the plant actually branches, called dichotomous branching. All right. So this is a plant that is native to Hawaii. It is an indigenous plant, and in fact, there are two species of moa. Okay, one, and they pretty much hybridize pretty well all right in the wild. This one here is the one that stands erect. There's another one that's pendant, you know, that it hangs down instead. Now, if you were to take a look closer at it, you can actually see these yellow structures on it. One of the things you'll notice is that this plant has no leaves, all right? But it does have a green stem, so it does do photosynthesis, except in this case, it is the stems that does the photosynthesis. And the sporangia on there are the reproductive structures that produce spores. Now, another thing about these spores, that they did actually have a function. Native Hawaiian men actually use the spores, which is like dust, they used it as a talcum powder. You know, because they used to wear the malo, yeah, the loincloth, and they sort of use it like a talcum powder to prevent chafing. Okay, that is, as far as I know, one of the uses that Hawaiian people put to use for moa. Another use that people use it for was, you know, little kids, they'd actually, you know, get two little stems of it and they'd play like a wishbone, you know, like that. And whoever got the bigger piece won. Okay, sort of like what we do with the wishbone of the turkey. Okay, right? Here we are, and what we have here is another member of the bromeliad family. Amazingly enough, this is relative to pineapple, okay? This, people locally call it, oftentimes they call it Spanish hair, Spanish moss, or Peles hair. That's kind of interesting. Anyway, so here you have this, and you would have thought, hey, that doesn't really look like a flowering plant, but indeed, it does flower. I've actually seen pieces of this plant someplace at a nursery probably, and it did have flowers on it. The flower being sort of like a silvery color, grayish color, not very outstanding, but this is related to the pineapple, okay? Peles hair, Spanish moss. Okay. Here we are at the foot of the blue marble tree, okay? One of the things I want you to notice is look at these roots here. Okay, this kind of root's very beautiful. Yeah, the way they just kind of very sculptural, very architectural. What their purpose is, of course, is to help keep the plant standing up. And why is that? Well, Eleocarpus or blue marble tree, just like all tropical trees, live in tropical forests, right? And in the tropical forest where it's hot and it's humid, generally the soils are very shallow. The nutrients in the soils tend to be near the surface because it's hot and it's warm. I mean, it's hot and it's moist. What happens is that the bacteria will actually break things down very quickly. So tropical soils are actually poor in nutrients, and the nutrients that it does have tend to be near the surface of the soil. Therefore, a lot of tropical trees, even in Hawaii too, tend to have shallow root systems because the nutrients are toward the surface of the soil, not really down deep. So in order for a tree that's pretty large to be able to keep standing up, okay, it needs to have something to help hold it up. So therefore, it sort of evolved and got these buttress roots over time. Remember that evolution is change. It happens over very, very long periods of time. Hundreds of thousands of years, okay, millions of years, all right? Anyway, buttress roots in the blue marble tree. Another thing about this plant is it's very unusual. It has these fruits, that's why they call it the blue marble tree, very pretty blue color, you know. But unfortunately, the blue color is fugitive. Not just that, is if you're to actually peel off the covering of the fruits, it's actually green inside. So the fruits, you would think, wow, that would make a nice lei. But generally, the seed inside is pretty hard. And people do actually make lei from the seed of this plant here. Yeah, it has a sculpture, sort of like a incised quality to it. Hard to see here, but generally pretty fruit, but the blue is fugitive. It doesn't stay. Okay. Here we are under the spreading gourd tree. Okay. If you take a look at this tree, which we're under right now, you can see a flower right there. Flower coming right off the main trunk. Okay, or one of the main trunks. That is a term called cauliflory. Okay, cauliflory. C-A-U-L-I-F-L-O-R-Y. Cauliflory. Another thing, since the flowers come right off the main trunk, well, you know that after pollination and fertilization, the fruit will come off the main trunks too, right? And there's a fruit up there. This tree is noteworthy. It is a recent introduction to Hawaii. I believe it's native to the tropical Americas. All right. The reason why it's important in terms of this economic use is that in the olden days, okay, long time ago, thousands of years ago, the Polynesian people who became the Hawaiian people came to the islands. They brought with them a plant called the ipu. Now the ipu, of course, is a gourd plant and is also a vine. Well, you know, sometime after contact in the early 1900s and into the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and etc., there was some kind of insect, probably an introduced insect, that was pretty much causing havoc and infesting the ipu. So people were not able to make the musical instruments as they had been used to. So what they did is they got the fruit from this tree, yeah, the gourd tree, and they use it. You know, the fruit gets to be about this big, sometimes larger, but people could use it to make their rattle. You know, the rattle that people use in hula, the uli uli. Okay, right? Okay, good. Okay, what you're looking at now is a plant called Suriname cherry. All right, Suriname cherry is related to the ohia lehua, one of our main forest trees in Hawaii. It's also related, okay, to paperbark tree, melaleuca, okay, related to eucalyptuses, all right, related to allspice, related to bay rum, okay. A lot of them have very strong smelling things, and if you were to look at the bark, you'd see that it does have a real pretty mottled appearance related to guava. Okay, the different kind of guavas. Now this Suriname cherry tree, it has these fruits that are like a little bitty pumpkin that turn really red. Okay, usually if you have a fruit that has a lot of color in it, whether it's blue, whether it's purple, whether it's red, whether it's orange or yellow, the deeper and more heavily pigmented it is, usually the healthier it is because it acts as an antioxidant. And do you know that an oxidation is something that we organisms have to go through because we need to do cellular respiration, and oxidation happens to our cells. That is probably what a lot of people who study these things, they believe that that is what's responsible for aging and cell death, is oxidation. Okay, so it is in the seed of our very existence that is a seed for our ending at the same time. Anyway, if you were to take a look at this fruit, okay, it's pretty, it's red. You can make jams and jellies and preserves from them. Okay, very tasty, very high in vitamin C, perhaps higher in vitamin C even than capsicum or peppers are, all right? Whereas for sure it has more vitamin C than oranges do, amazingly. Oranges, lemons, all those different kind of citrus fruits. Very good stuff. So if you ever see a place where you have a lot of these things around and nobody's eating them, why not take a couple? You know, that could probably give you your recommended daily allowance, okay, for vitamin C, all right? Here we are at Foster Garden on the corner of Nuuanu and Vineyard in downtown Honolulu. Well, let's talk a little bit about the history of the place. Once upon a time, this place, Foster Garden, used to extend all the way out to Queen Emma Summer Palace and were part of the Crown lands belonging to the Kamehameha family. Well, what happened then was a German physician named William Hillebrand came out to Hawaii, probably for his health, because he traveled the whole world looking for some place that would be amenable, you know, that would be gentle with his body since he did not enjoy good health. Anyway, so he came to Hawaii. He was an MD, and he became the physician to the family of Kamehameha V, the royal family's physician. He was also the physician for the Queen's Hospital, the main physician in that position. Well then, what happened is he stayed in Hawaii, he hiked around all over the place. He actually had this property which the Kamehamehas gave to him. Yes, so this land was gifted to William Hillebrand as, I guess, part of his recompense of being the physician to the royal family. Anyway, so he hiked all over Oahu, hiked all over the other islands. He collected plants, right? He also made herbarium specimens, pickled things. Okay, and when he finally decided to leave, after 20 years, he took all his things with him, went back to Germany. He also took with him, I guess, the work that was to become the first flora of the islands, I believe, all right? He wrote the first flora of the Hawaiian Islands. The next thing, too, is that the property then changed hands. Captain Foster and Mrs. Mary Foster bought the property, and as the couple were childless, when Mrs. Foster got older, she willed it to the city and county of Honolulu, and it was named Foster Garden after Mrs. Mary Foster. Now this garden belongs to the city and county of Honolulu, but they hold it under a certain kind of condition. It is always to remain a botanical garden, always. It can never become a commercial property. There will never be a strip mall built here. They will never be able to build houses here, condominiums, or anything like that. It is to remain a botanical garden in perpetuity. Okay? So here we are at Foster Garden. Here we go. Here we are. You see this plant behind me? This is something called the traveler's palm, which is kind of interesting because it is not really a palm at all, even though it is indeed a tropical monocot, all right? It does have parallel venation and etc., all right? Now the thing about this plant too, it does look like it has woody growth, but that is not really true wood. Remember that true wood comes from secondary growth, and true wood only happens in dicots, okay? Now this plant here, which you can see gets pretty darn big, okay? This is actually a plant that is native to Madagascar, which is an island sort of off the southeastern coast of Africa in the Indian Ocean, all right? Revenalia madagascarensis, I believe the name of this plant is, right? If you look at it, you might not be able to tell just by looking at it straight on. But if you were to look at its inflorescence or its cluster of flowers, what will you see? You'll see something that looks very much like the regular bird of paradise, which is indeed native to South Africa. So they're very nearby to each other, both species of plants. They're in the same plant family called the Strelitziaceae, yeah? Because of course, the regular, orange bird of paradise is Strelitzia regina, whereas this is a different genus, but they are related, okay? Anyway, some noteworthy things about this plant. For one thing, like I said, it is actually a plant looking a lot like the regular bird of paradise. That's one thing. Another thing, you can see the whole kind of overwhelming, look of the plant. It's big, very dramatic, typical of tropical plants. A lot of tropical plants are like that way. Another thing about it, it's very architectural. You can imagine taking photographs of it from various places. You can see that it's very beautiful depending on where you're looking at it. You can actually look at a whole bunch of different things and you can really see what's in there, and make a really nice piece of art with it. Another thing about it too, it has a different type of pollinator. We're generally used to having birds, insects such as moths and butterflies and bees, beetles, all these different kind of insects being major pollinators. But this is a plant that is not pollinated by a bird or by an insect or by a reptile or an amphibian. It's pollinated by a mammal. Not only is it pollinated by a mammal, it's also pollinated by a primate. Primates are a group of animals that are related to us. This plant is actually pollinated by lemurs, all right, in the forests of Madagascar, okay? So what does a lemur do? It will actually climb and get into the tree. It'll actually open up the inflorescence. It'll feed on the nectar that's in there, then inadvertently get the pollen on its snout. Because one of the things about animals too is that when they're pollinating a flower, that's not what they're doing. Their motivation is not to pollinate the flower. The motivation is to get food, and that's what it does with this plant. And then this animal with pollen all over its snout, he or she, because both of them do this, they'll actually jump from one tree to another tree to another tree because they are arboreal. They live in treetops until they'll finally get to another one just like this finally. Then they'll get food out of that one too. And then what they'll do is inadvertently pollinate the plant. So in this way too, you actually have the plant using the animal for the plant's own purposes, all right? So here we have the traveler's palm. Now, look at this plant behind me. Wow, what a plant. Look at how those leaves are, how big they are, okay? This is a palm, okay, a member of the palm family, the Ericaceae, all right? It is a palm. It is also a solitary palm with just one stem. It's also a fan palm with fan-shaped leaves, yeah? Well, this is called the talipot palm, all right? And here it is in all its glory, right? One of the things you may notice about it is that the leaves are sort of hanging down a little bit, and I'll tell you why. This is an example of a plant known as a monocarpic plant. Mono means one. Carpi refers to a flower or to fruit, okay? So it flowers only once. what happens is that the plant grows, puts out leaves, makes root, stem, and leaves, grows, 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 and then due to some internal signal inside it, some kind of biological clock, what does it do? It'll say, okay, it's time for me to bloom, all right? So what happens, it sends all the energy, stored energy, which is maybe why some of these leaves are looking rather exhausted right now, actually send all this energy into the inflorescence, into the flowering stalk to grow, and then what then happens is that it flowers. There'll be thousands and thousands of bees buzzing around it, pollinating the flowers, and then it'll set fruit, and then the plant will die, okay? Even though this is a perennial plant, it's probably lived for at least 30 years, okay, 30 something, almost 40 years. It actually hasn't flowered at all during that time. It flowers once, makes fruit, and then it dies. That's what we mean by monocarpic, flowers only once. Another plant in the Hawaiian environment that does the same thing is the poster child of Hawaiian botany, which is called the Haleakala silversword, okay, the ahinahina. That is another plant that does the same thing. So different plants are on different parts of the world because this is not native to Hawaii. Okay, it's a recent introduction. But still, you have different phenomenon happening at different places. And in this case, what we call monocarpy. Okay, remember that, monocarpy. The plant grows, flowers once, fruits, and then dies. All right? Thank you. All right, now here we are. We're in the palm section of Foster Botanical Garden. And in here you can see a whole bunch of different kinds of palms, okay? For me, I'm not a palm expert, so for me, this is always instructed to me too, and I'm kind of keep having to reinforce that. Because some people might say, all palms look the same. Well, they do have very similar growth habits. Most of the time, they have a rosette of leaves at the top of a stem. Okay, this is probably an adaptation to evolution in a jungle format or somewhere where there's a lot of trees. Because of course, if you have your cluster of leaves all the way at the top of a stem, more likely you get more sun, yes? Now here, this is one kind of palm, has a fan-shaped leaf. This one looks like it has maybe more than one trunk, so it's like a multi-stem, clumpy kind of palm. And you can see here, we have some flower buds. Okay, so palms are flowering plants. Okay, they are flowering plants. You can have some more there as well. You can see all the flower buds growing. And then what we'll have here, we also have another fan palm, solitary palm. So when you look at different palms next to each other, they really do look different. They really are very different. And we're very fortunate in Hawaii because, you know, we have two of the best palm collections in the world. I think Foster Gardens collection and the collection over at the Lion Arboretum together make one of the best collection of palms in the world, in the whole world. I guess since we're in the subtropics, that's actually very good. And we can have some palms that are tropical. We can have, of course, the subtropical ones. We can have those that are sort of like on the edge of being temperate area palms, such as date palms and such. Okay? So you have a whole bunch of fan palms along here. I want to go take us over there to where a very special plant is. Okay? So over here, come on over here, we have other fan palms, okay, with fruits on them. Yeah, so these are flower-bearing plants that make fruits. And here we have a plant called a lolu. This is one. Okay, this is a native genus of palms to Hawaii. This is the only native palm in Hawaii. There's quite a few species, but they're getting less and less prolific, or even less and less to be noticed, because probably they have an enemy, okay, that has come to Hawaii also. So this looks like Puchardia ka'alai, so I'm imagining this is from Mount Ka'ala, a particular species. Now here, we have a Puchardia lauriana, okay? And this one here, very, very special. They even put a little cage around it, I guess, to protect it. You can see that it will be flowering, or it is flowering right now, okay? Palms are flowering plants, okay? You can see the fan-shaped leaves. Now the lolu, unfortunately, in Hawaii, the lolu plant, the lolu palm, okay, is a native palm of Hawaii. Coconut palms are not native. Yeah, coconut palms were probably brought by the Polynesian people. So the lolu palm, unfortunately, is really, really threatened. In prehistory, way before anybody came here, the windward side of Oahu, people pretty much know for certain, was actually covered with a lolu forest, lolu and another plant, the whole windward plain. Okay, in prehistory, before there were people here. So you had lolu mostly with another plant growing there also. What happened then is that when people came, okay, people introduced the rat. How do they know that the field and the plain was dominated by lolu? Well, what did they do? They took a pollen core. They actually cored into the earth, bringing up, layers and layers of sediment, and in those layers you have pollen. Now, pollen of all parts of a plant, that is the most persistent part of the plant usually, even more than wood sometimes, and everybody's heard of petrified wood and such. But pollen has a very hard exene or outside coat of it, and they're also very distinctive, so you can actually differentiate between different species, okay, even in the same genus, even in the same, in the same genus, between one and the other by what the pollen looks like. Well, they did the core and they found out that for millennia, for thousands and thousands of years, the dominant plants were indeed the lolu palms there, because they matched the pollen of the lolu palms that they have now. Well, what happened is that once humans came here, an inadvertent introduction probably was the rat, okay? Now the seeds of the lolu, you might not think it, but they're edible. I once had a student whose father remembered the olden days in Hawaii. He said he being the youngest child in the family, his job was to actually watch while the fruits of the lolu were cooking, and then he said it was very smelly, not really pleasing at all, but the nuts are really good to eat. All right, so here we have an incidence of where a palm or a plant that was once dominant, over a very large part of an island is actually, heading toward extinction because it can't reproduce itself. Every time, it throws flowers, it makes seed, it makes a fruit, the rats go up and eat it, very tasty. There's also another story somebody told me that in a greenhouse they were trying to grow lolu plants, and what happened? What happened? Something kept taking away the seeds, kept taking away the fruits. Okay, so what did they do? They hung around one time after dark, came in there, shined their flashlight, they saw a rat running away. Okay, so it was a human-introduced rat that has actually led to the decline of the lolu plant. So here you have very clear indication of how we humans sometimes affect our environment. Right? So the lolu, it's pretty much teetering toward the verge of extinction. Okay, there are at least several species of these, and there are, I think, a couple that are extinct by now already, unfortunately. Okay, lolu, native palm of Hawaii. Now here you have another palm, okay, with a feather palm over there. Just wanted to show you, we have clumping palms here, clumping palms there. So when you actually look at them side by side, you can see that they really are different, even though some people say, oh, it's a palm, okay? There's one over there with very beautiful silvery green leaves. Okay, that is probably a palm of a high light area, because one of the qualities of a kind of plant that is from a high light area is the presence of silvery hairs or like a whitish cover on them. All right? Okay? Anyway, so here we are in the palm grove. Okay. Okay, so that was our first trip to Foster Botanical Garden. Later in the semester, we're going to go back there again and look at some more plants and have some more fun. Okay, so then hopefully you enjoyed yourself and as much as I enjoyed it too. Okay, so we'll see you next time. Aloha.